family sold her for being too plain, but the rich rancher saw the only face he wanted forever: Texas. Summer of 1887, a sunburned sky over a dusty crossroads town. The wind swept low through Hollow Creek, kicking up dry soil and whispers. It was auction day, but no cattle or horses stood tethered. Instead, on the wooden steps of the old saloon, repurposed for shame, sat a girl too still to notice the heat. June, 19 years old, neither beautiful nor strange-looking, the kind of face you forget if you are not forced to remember. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes didn't meet anyone's, not her father's, not her mother's, not the shopkeepers who passed by pretending not to look. Her pale blue dress, ironed too flat, was the only sign anyone had bothered that morning. Behind her from the porch, her father barked to the saloon keeper. "She ain't a looker, but she's quiet. Can cook, can sew, don't talk back. That's worth something, ain't it?" Someone inside chuckled. The sound rolled down June's spine like a dropped coin. Her mother leaned against the post with arms crossed, a hard squint on her face. "It's not like Lucille," she muttered. "Now she would have fetched a fine price." Lucille, the golden daughter, the one who got invited to dance with the banker's son, the one with curled hair and silk gloves. She was gone now, married off and shining like a pearl in someone else's house. June remained, and now apparently for sale. A small crowd gathered, not to bid, just to witness, and then he came, a single rider on a bay horse. No entourage, no silver spurs, but he sat tall, and the townsfolk went quiet without knowing why. His clothes were plain, dusty from travel, but the leather was fine. The gelling beneath him was well-bred, calm, even in this heat. He dismounted slowly, tying the reins without a word. His boots thudded against the wood as he walked toward June. Weston Turner, some recognized him, owner of Turner Ranch, far out past the northern ridge, wealthy, private, the kind of man you heard about but never really saw. Not in town, not like this. Jun's father straightened, his grin wide and desperate. Mr. Turner did not expect. "Well, now you looking for a house girl. She ain't much to look at, I know, but she's cheap. We ain't greedy men." Weston said nothing at first. His gaze went to June, not appraisingly, not like the others, just looking. After a long pause, he asked, "What's her name?" "June." The father answered quickly. "She answers to whatever, though. Won't give you no trouble." Still staring at her, Weston reached into his coat. He pulled out a leather pouch and handed it over without counting. "This is enough." The father blinked. "You sure you don't want to?" I said, "It's enough." The pouch vanished into a greedy hand. The mother finally stepped forward, not to hug her daughter, not to say good-bye, but to say, "You best behave now, June. Don't shame us more than you already have." June stood. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply stepped down from the porch as Weston turned away. One of the saloon men grabbed her wrist to help her onto the wagon, rougher than needed. She winced, but said nothing. Before the wagon pulled away, she looked back one last time. Her mother was still standing by the post, counting coins with a pinched expression. She did not look up, not once. The wheels creaked beneath them as the wagon rattled along the dirt path, leaving behind the town and its watching eyes. June sat upright beside Weston Turner, her hands clasped in her lap, the silence between them as dry as the land stretching into the horizon. She stole a glance at him now and then. He kept his eyes forward, reins loose in his hands. He did not speak. He did not smile. He had bought her without asking a single question beyond her name. Am I to be his servant? She wondered. A mistress in secret, a wife he hides in some backroom like a broken clock. The ache of humiliation still burned under her skin, the memory of her father's voice echoing across the saloon porch. "She ain't much to look at," rang louder than the wheels beneath them. A dry wind kicked up dust. She coughed once sharply. Without a word, Weston reached behind the seat, pulled out a dark wool cloak, and offered it to her. She hesitated. His gaze did not leave the road. "Put it on," he said simply. She wrapped it around herself. It smelled faintly of pine and leather. It was warm. For a few quiet miles, they rode with nothing but the sound of hooves and distant cicadas. June's thoughts drifted backward, past the heat and shame into a childhood painted with unequal strokes. Lucille, with her golden ringlets and practiced piano fingers, had always been the portrait daughter. June remembered sitting cross-legged beneath the kitchen table as their mother buttoned Lucille's Sunday dress, murmuring, "Stand still now, darling. Pretty girls need to be perfect." June had not been taught piano. She was taught to mend, to milk, to disappear when company came. Once, when a neighbor's boy had tried to give her a ribbon, her mother had snatched it from her hand. "She will not be anyone's charity," she'd snapped. That boy had later courted Lucille. June never saw the ribbon again. The wagon rolled to a stop. She looked up. They were on the edge of a wide, untamed field. Flowers she did not know swayed gently in the wind, and tall grass reached for the pale afternoon sun. Weston stood, stepped down, and offered her a hand. She ignored it, climbing out on her own. He did not seem offended. They stood together in silence for a moment. June tightened the cloak around her shoulders. Then softly, Weston asked, "If you could choose, how would you live?" The question startled her more than if he had grabbed her by the arm. She stared at him. She faltered. "I do not understand." "You heard me," he said. "Not what you were told to want, not what others expect, just you. If the choice were yours," she opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had ever asked her that. No one had cared. "I would live somewhere quiet," she said finally. "Somewhere I could be useful and not measured." He nodded once, satisfied. "Then maybe," he said, returning to the reins, "we can begin there." She climbed back into the wagon beside him, unsure of what had just passed between them. But the silence after that felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just waiting. The Turner Ranch stretched wider than June had imagined. Miles of open fields, wind-worn barns, and wild lavender that crept along the fences like it had nowhere else to go. The main house sat proud but unpretentious on a small rise, with a porch wide enough to gather dreams and dust alike. No one greeted them with questions when they arrived. No one stared. The housekeeper, a woman named Mavis, with a steel-gray braid and eyes that saw more than they said, showed June to a room with a small window facing east. She did not ask who June was. She simply placed folded linens at the edge of the bed and said, "We wake early here." But Weston never gave orders, not that day, not any day that followed. June waited to be told where to stand, what to clean, when to serve, but the instructions never came. Instead, the days passed gently. She wandered the garden where herbs had long since gone wild. She pulled weeds without being asked. She labeled jars of dried mint and chamomile. When she learned one of the ranch hands could not read the medicine labels, she offered to teach him, and then two others joined. Weston noticed, but he said nothing. The men spoke of her quietly, but not cry. They called her Miss June, though no one had told them to. In town, whispers grew. Weston Turner went and bought himself a plain girl. Must be for some secret reason. Maybe she's quiet enough to control. When the local blacksmith joked about it in front of Weston, the reply was swift and quiet. "No one at my ranch is a possession," Weston said. "You'll remember that." The blacksmith did not joke again. Inside the house, Weston watched June, not with desire, but with attention. She did not pace when she was nervous. She smoothed her skirt. She always placed her hands behind her back after washing them, as if afraid they would offend someone by being visible. She had a habit of looking at the moon the way others looked at sermons. She did not ask questions, but he began to wish she would. One afternoon, a scream echoed from the stables. A young colt had broken loose and caught its leg between two slats of a fence. Blood and panic filled the air. Weston and June both ran. He reached the colt first, gripping its neck and murmuring steady words. It thrashed, eyes wide with pain. "Bring water." Weston called over his shoulder. June did. And more than that, she brought her calm. She knelt by the colt's leg. Assessing the wound, "I need a cloth, clean, boiling if you have it." "You know horses?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I know breaks. My uncle fell once on the ice." They worked in tandem, silent but sure. She pressed, he held. Her hair came loose in the sweat and strain. His sleeves rolled up, arms streaked with mud and blood. When it was over, the colt lay breathing, bandaged and quiet. June stood brushing dirt from her knees. Weston reached out and without thinking wiped a smudge of blood from her cheek. His fingers paused longer than they needed to. She froze, not from fear, not from discomfort, just something else. He met her eyes. "You had a mark," he said quietly. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I did not notice." He let his hand drop. She turned away first, but not before stealing a glance that stayed longer than habit should allow. Neither of them spoke of it again, but that night she stood on the porch and looked up at the moon. When Weston passed behind her, he did not disturb her silence. He simply stood beside it. It was early spring when the stranger arrived. A man in a fine coat, eyes sharp behind round spectacles, carrying a leather case and a rolled canvas strapped to his back. June saw him from the herb garden, stepping down from a hired wagon, and assumed he was here for the horses. A new portrait of one of Weston's prize stallions, perhaps. Rich men liked paintings of their wealth. She went back to trimming mint. Later that afternoon, Mavis knocked lightly at her door. "Mr. Turner asks that you sit by the front window with your book." June blinked. "Why?" "Just do," Mavis said with a half smile. "Sun's good right now." June obliged. She took her usual seat by the window. The light there was softest in late day, and opened the worn book Weston had given her from the shelf. Poems, mostly ones she barely understood, but they felt quiet like her. The artist sat up across the room without a word. When she finally realized what was happening, when she understood she was the subject, not the backdrop, her first instinct was to rise. But Weston spoke from the hallway. "Stay just like that." She turned her face slightly. "I am not." She began. Flustered, "I know," he said simply. He walked into the room, addressed the artist. "Do not paint her to look like someone else. I do not care if the jaw is too square or the nose too soft. Capture her at she is this moment, not for flattery, for truth." The artist nodded. It took 3 days. Each morning, June sat with her book, her face tilted to the same spot of light. The painter did not instruct her to smile or shift or pose. He painted her hands as they were, fingers curled under the page. He painted the way her eyes dipped slightly downward, as if listening to the words instead of reading them. On the 4th day, Weston oversaw the framing. He had the finished canvas hung in the main sitting room above the stone hearth. It was the only painting in the house. Guests noticed. They asked, "Who is she?" Weston never gave her name. He would only reply, "She is the one I do not wish to forget." News of the painting spread. Whispers became questions, and one day a letter arrived from Austin, an invitation to dine with the family of a railroad magnate. Their daughter, 22, wealthy, educated. Rumor said they wanted to unite lands, wanted the Turner name. Weston returned the letter unopened. When asked why, he said only, "I have already chosen." He never spoke those words to June, but she heard them in other ways, in the way he kept the painting in plain sight, in the way he asked if tea was too hot, or if the porch swing creaked too loudly beneath her. One quiet evening, she passed the front room and saw someone through the window. A man stooped thinner than memory allowed, standing just beyond the porch. Her father. June stepped back. heart suddenly pounding. She watched as Weston met him outside. They spoke in hushed voices. The older man shuffled his hat in his hands. Weston listened, then walked into the house. He returned with something in his palm. Money, perhaps. June could not be sure. Her father took it without looking up. He did not ask for her, did not ask to see her. He simply left, boots dragging in the dirt. Weston stood there a moment longer, then came inside and said nothing. June waited until he had gone upstairs. She went to the hearth, stood in front of her own painted face, and wept silently, fully, not because her father had come for money, but because Weston had not mentioned it, because he had understood how it would break her, and had protected her from it, not as a duty, but as a choice. The first time June saw her sister again, Lucille was wearing scarlet. The color did not flatter her, it shouted. She stepped down from a rented carriage in front of the Turner Ranch, as if she had arrived to claim something long lost. Gold earrings, high-heeled boots, unsuited for dust, a parasol too delicate for prairie wind. Her smile was practiced, hollow. June, she called, arms open like they had not grown up in the same suffocating house. June stood frozen by the porch rail. Lucille swept up the steps and kissed the air beside her cheek. "My, look at this place," Lucille said brightly. "You've done well. They said you'd been bought, but I see now you've been upgraded." June said nothing. Lucille chatted for minutes without pause about dresses, parties, gentlemen callers, but her eyes kept drifting inside the house, past the open door, toward the painting hanging above the hearth. Later that afternoon, she returned with their parents in tow. Their father walked slower now. His voice still carried, though louder than pride, sharper than shame. "We've come for our daughter," he announced on the porch, seeing as she's been misled. A young girl like June, lured from home. No ceremony, no contract. Why, it's a scandal. Weston appeared in the doorway, coat slung over one shoulder. He stepped onto the porch slowly. June stood beside him, her hand trembling against the rail. "She's not a piece of property," Weston said calmly. "And I didn't take her. I chose her. There's a difference." Lucille's eyes narrowed. "You think people will believe that when they find out what you did." "I did nothing," Weston replied. "Exactly." Lucille snapped. "No vows, no rings. You think your money can quiet questions." June stepped forward. "Please stop." But Lucille was already turning back toward her carriage, gathering her skirts. "This isn't over." The rumors began 2 days later. Lucille had told townsfolk she was pregnant, that Weston had taken her riding once, long before June, and things happened. She claimed he refused to acknowledge it now, claimed June had been brought here to silence the scandal. The story slithered through Hollow Creek like a cracked bottle of whiskey. Some drank it eagerly, others sipped in suspicion. June heard it first from the baker's wife, whispered with apology. She did not ask Weston if it was true. She did not need to, but she also did not want him caught in the fire of her family's deceit. That night, she packed a small bundle, left a note with 3 words, "I cannot stay." She walked into the dark. It rained by midnight. Cold, sharp sheets that turned dirt to slick clay. Weston found the empty room before dawn. By midday, he was on horseback, drenched, eyes scanning every trail from the ridge to the lowlands. He found her near sundown, a small hunter's cabin, half collapsed near the edge of the woods, smoke barely curling from the chimney. The door creaked open when he knocked. She was there seated near a fire too small to fight the chill. Wet hair, raw hands, silence. He stepped inside. "June." She did not look up. "You should not be here." "I should be nowhere else. I had to leave." "No," he said softly, kneeling in front of her. "You ran to protect me." "That was never your burden." Rain pounded on the roof. Weston stayed there, one knee on the ground, water running from his coat. "June," he said. his voice quiet but firm. I spent years looking at people and seeing only what I wanted to see. But the day I saw you, I saw the truth. He reached out, brushing a lock of damp hair from her face. If the world turns from you, he whispered, then let me be the world that does not. She looked at him then. Tears spilled without sound, and she folded into his arms, shivering, breaking, whole. Outside, the storm softened, and somewhere between thunder and stillness, the sky began to clear. The morning after the storm was cool and quiet. The clouds had scattered, leaving behind a pale sky and the smell of wet earth. June sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, her hands still trembling from the night before. Weston had said little after bringing her back. He had built a fire, dried her boots, made tea without asking. There was no lecture, no demand for answers, only presence. Now, as the first light reached over the hills, she watched him mount his horse. "You are going alone?" she asked softly. "Yes, where?" He paused. "Adjusting the restow give them the truth," he said. "And take back yours." Then he rode. By noon the town bell rang, a sound usually reserved for fire or festival. But this time it was something else. Weston had asked for a public meeting. The square filled faster than it had in years. Farmers, merchants, wives with aprons still dusted in flour. Everyone knew what it was about. Whispers crawled like ants. About that girl, the plain one. They say she ran. No, they say she was chased. Weston stood at the center beside the town's priest and the council elder. His coat was still stained from the trail, his boots muddy from the cabin path. He looked like a man who had not slept, but who had come with purpose. When Lucille arrived, she did not come quietly. She wore a dark veil, clutched a handkerchief. Her parents followed behind her like shadows with fragile pride. I did not want to speak of it. Lucille began tearfully, loud enough for all to hear. But Mr. Turner left me no choice. He promised me things, affection, security, and then discarded me for my sister. Gasps rose. Some turned to Weston, waiting for the denial. He did not give one. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. He handed it to the priest, who opened it and read medical verification. Miss Lucille Delaney is not and has not been with child. Additionally, records confirm her attempts to borrow funds under false pretenses from Mr. Turner's staff. Murmurs shifted from shock to judgment. Lucille's face palled. Her father stepped forward, voice raised. "That's slander. She's a good girl." But someone from the crowd shouted, "A good girl does not sell her sister." Then another voice, "Or lie for money." Lucille spun wild-eyed. "You believe him over your own kind." Weston stepped forward then, not loud but firm. "I have held my tongue out of respect, but silence has harmed the one person who deserved protection." He looked out at the crowd, at every eye that had Judge June dismissed her, labeled her without knowing. "I did not buy June. I did not save her. I saw her, that's all. And what I saw was someone worth choosing over gossip, over greed, over gold." He took a breath. "And I choose her still." Lucille tried to speak, but Weston raised his hand, not to silence, but to finish. "Anyone who speaks her name with lies from this day forward," he said slowly, "will have to answer to me." The square fell into hush. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. Lucille turned, grabbed her mother's arm, and fled. Her father hesitated, looked at Weston, then at the crowd before following in shame. In the back of the gathering, June stood half hidden by the doorway of the church. She had not meant to come, but Mavis had led her there anyway. When Weston saw her, he walked through the crowd without hesitation. He reached for her hand, held it in full view. She looked down, tears brimming, not from humiliation, from something else. He leaned close and whispered, "You do not have to say a word." She did not. She just held tighter. The days after the meeting felt different. The air in Hollow Creek carried less noise, less suspicion, but not for everyone. Lucille and her parents returned to their home on the edge of town, only to find the doors of society now closed. The grocer no longer extended credit. The dressmaker refused commissions. Even the church pew that once bore their family name sat empty. Then came the debt collectors. Money borrowed on Lucille's false promises now demanded payment. When it did not come, the house was taken, furniture dragged out, curtains stripped from the windows like sins made visible. Lucille grew desperate. One night, under the cover of darkness, she crept on to Turner Ranch. She found a black mare near the back fence, already saddled by chance. She never made it past the barn. Jesse, one of Weston's oldest ranch hands, stepped from the shadows with a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. "I reckon that horse ain't yours," he said calmly. She was brought to Weston just past midnight. June stood in the doorway as they led Lucille into the parlor, rain damp, breathless. Her fine clothes faded and torn. She did not speak. Weston did. "You came to steal," he said. "After all you've already taken." Lucille's voice cracked. "I had nowhere else. I know. He stepped closer, but not cry. "I will not call the sheriff," he said. "Not because you are innocent, but because the woman you hurt would not want that." He glanced at June. "She would not want your shame turned into spectacle. She would not want your name shouted in courtrooms." He looked back at Lucille. "I spare you," he said, "not because you deserve it, but because she does." Lucille did not thank him. She simply left, head bowed, dress clinging to her knees, and disappeared down the muddy path she had once strutted in crimson. She was not seen in Hollow Creek again. The next morning, June rose early and walked into town alone. She carried a small pouch, coins earned from the sale of her salves, her stitched cloths, her quiet work. She left it on the doorstep of her parents' boarding house. No note, just the weight of decency. Mavis found her outside the chapel and asked why. June answered softly, "Not because I forgot what they did, but because I want them to know that being sold did not make me small." Back at the ranch, Weston had something waiting. He took June riding that afternoon, leading her through thickets of wild brush until they reached a clearing near the bend of the creek. The grass there swayed high. Yellow wild flowers bloomed in shy clusters. The sky above stretched wide and silent. "I bought this land yesterday," he said. She looked around, confused. "It is just a field." He smiled. "It is your field." Her eyes widened. "It is called Plain Meadow," he added. She blinked. "Why?" "Because they used to call you Plain," he said, "and yet somehow you make even silence bloom." The sun dipped low. June stood in the center of the meadow, wind brushing her cheeks, skirts rustling around her legs like whispers. Weston stepped behind her, took her hand, brought it gently to his lips. "They sold you," he said, voice low, "because they thought no one would ever see you." He looked at her fully then, nothing guarded, nothing withheld, "But I saw the only face I will ever want, and I will choose it again and again and again and again and again." She could not speak. She did not need to. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and Weston caught one with the pad of his thumb. There, in the heart of Plain Meadow, as dusk wrapped the world in gold, the past unraveled, and only love remained. 1 year later, the meadow was no longer just a quiet field tucked behind the creek. It was a chapel of wind and wild flowers. That morning, guests arrived by wagon, horseback, even on foot. More than the ranch had ever seen. Dressed in clean shirts and Sunday dresses, they came not out of curiosity, but reverence. No one whispered any more about how June had arrived. They spoke instead about what she had become. June stood in a simple cream dress, hand-stitched with tiny lavender thread. No veil, no jewelry, just her. Weston wore his best coat, still modest, still worn, but his eyes had the steadiness of a man who knew where he belonged. They stood under an arch of woven willow and sage with flowers picked that morning by the children June taught. No vows were shouted, just one promise: "I will choose you." Weston said, even when no one is watching. "I will believe you," June whispered, "even when I doubt myself." The guests rose in applause, not for spectacle, but for something rare, something real. Afterward, as lanterns glowed and supper was passed hand to hand, Weston led June a few yards from the meadow to a small wooden building, newly painted and freshly roofed. The sign above the door read, "Plain Hearts, Bright Futures." Inside were 2 rows of benches, a table stacked with slates and chalk, shelves lined with thread and fabric squares. It would be Hollow Creek's first schoolhouse for girls, built not for those who had status, but for those who had been overlooked. June taught there 3 days a week. Her first students were the daughters of ranch hands, a girl orphaned in a prairie fire, and one young mother who never learned to read. June taught them not just letters, but how to hold their heads like they mattered. Sometimes Weston would sit outside the window, pretending to fix a saddle just to listen. One afternoon, a small voice tugged at his sleeve. It belonged to Clara, a brownied girl with a ribbon too loose in her braid. "Mr. Turner," she asked, "why did you pick Miss June?" Weston looked through the window at his wife, laughing softly as she corrected a stitch sunlight on her cheek. He smiled because she never needed to shine, he said, to make others see light. The evening, as the sun slipped low and the world turned gold again, Weston and June rode together through Plain Meadow, side by side, no words, just quiet hoof-beats and the rustle of flowers in wind. Lavender bent with the breeze as if bowing. In the distance the land looked endless, but they did not need the world to be large, only enough to hold one love, and that here in Plain Meadow was more than enough. Thank you for riding with us through this unforgettable journey of love, dignity, and quiet strength. If June and Weston's story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the most overlooked souls can carry the brightest light, don't forget to hit that like button, share this story, and most of all, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. This is where hearts find home on untamed land, where every tale reminds us love doesn't need permission, only the courage to choose it. Tap the bell so you never miss a new frontier romance. Until next time, keep your spirit wild and your love legendary.